Signore e signori, ospiti.
Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, good afternoon and welcome.
Distinguished guests and welcome. We are about to start this plenary session on implementing the Sendai framework, Sustainable Development Goals, and the Paris Agreement in a coherent way, here at the European Forum for Disaster Risk Reduction in Rome. And a warm welcome to those of you watching our proceedings via the live web stream. My name is Aminda Leigh, and I'm a British and, from yesterday, also an Italian journalist and broadcaster. I used to work at the BBC in the UK before moving to live and work out of Rome. I've specialised in environmental topics and have experience of the civil protection sphere, having moderated at the EU's Civil Protection Forum in Brussels several times. And I'm honoured to be your moderator today. We want you to all be able to follow the proceedings, so there is interpretation available in English, French, Italian and Russian. Italian is number 1, English 2, French number 3, and Russian is 4. And of course we have Italian Sign Language as well. Please do make sure you have your headsets with you because you'll probably need them for our panel discussion. In a moment, I'm going to introduce this plenary topic and explain how the next 90 minutes will be structured. First, a few practical points for those of you who are in the hall. Please keep your mobiles on silent. Maybe you put them back onto ringtone at lunchtime. So please do keep them on silent. But if you want to tweet, the hashtag is EFDRR 2018. In order to give you plenty of opportunities to put your questions to the panelists later in the plenary, we'll be using Pigeonhole Live. Some of you may have already used it this morning. People online can also send in their questions from afar. If you have a smartphone, tablet, laptop, just launch your internet browser and enter www.pigeonhole.at into the address bar. Then key in the event passcode, which is EFDRR. Again, there'll be another prompt, and you need to type in EFDRR again. And that's where you can submit your questions to the panelists, and you can also vote on other people's questions. We have people monitoring the submissions, and they will be selecting the questions that we'll be seeing up on the screens behind us. And of course, we will have microphones in the audience as well, if you'd prefer to put your question in person. So this plenary session is going to start with a keynote speech from Ambassador Maira Mora, the Director General of the Council of the Baltic Sea States. We're then going to move on to a panel debate with some discussion between our speakers to hear their different perspectives and experiences before I will open up the floor to you. And I'll introduce our panelists in a short while. So thinking about the topic we have this afternoon, in physical terms, I calculated, it wasn't very easy to calculate, but the distance to travel between Sendai, birthplace of the Framework on Disaster Risk Reduction, to New York, where the Sustainable Development Goals were adopted, and then on to Paris, where the Convention on Climate Change was agreed, is more than 6,000 kilometers, or over 10,000 miles. That distance is close to halfway round our planet. But the international agendas agreed in these 3 locations aim to throw a protective ring around the entire globe, reducing the risk of disasters, bettering the lives of human beings, and protecting the planet for future generations. The objectives of the Sendai framework, the SDGs, and the Paris Agreement are clearly interrelated and in some ways also interdependent. This means there must be strong coordination and cooperation between all 3 agendas to ensure a coherent approach. This session is going to explore how that coherence can be achieved. We'll be sharing experiences and ideas on what we can learn from each other so we can all move forward together to achieve the ambitious targets that humanity has set itself. To start our discussions this afternoon, I'd like to introduce this plenary's keynote speaker, Ambassador Maira Mora. She's the Director General of the Secretariat of the Council of the Baltic Sea States. The Secretariat is based in Sweden and celebrated its 20th birthday this October, I believe. Oh, 25th. It was last year. Well, happy anniversary from last year. Anyway, you're certainly around and you're a strong body going forward. Earlier in Ambassador Mora's career, she served as Latvian ambassador to Belarus and Lithuania and was head of the EU delegation in Belarus. To give you a little bit of background, for those of you who don't know what it is, the CBSS consists of 11 member states plus a representative of the European Union. It covers a kind of macro or mega region of countries sharing the same geography around the shores of the Baltic Sea. Its motto is building collaboration and trust, and it supports a global perspective on regional problems. These include politically and practically translating the SDGs, the Paris Agreement, and the Sendai framework into regional actions on the ground. Ambassador Mora is here today to remind us why coherent implementation is important and to illustrate how the CBSS brings together these 11 different countries to tackle common challenges in a coherent way. Please welcome our keynote speaker, Ambassador Maira Mora.
Now it is okay. Dear Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I'm very honored to address such a distinguished audience and would like to begin by expressing special appreciation to the organizers of this forum, the Italian chairmanship of the European Forum for Disaster Risk Reduction, the Italian Civil Protection Department's presidency of the Council of Ministers, the European Commission, the Europa Major Hazards Agreement of the Council of Europe, and the United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction. Thank you for inviting me and for offering this opportunity to present the CBSS position on how we can strive for coherence in the implementation of the three policy frameworks we will discuss in this session, namely the Sendai Framework, 2030 Agenda, and the Sustainable Development Goals, as well as the Paris Agreement. I would like to begin by stressing the importance of these three policy frameworks. Together, they are the stepping stones for us to build a future for the next generations on this planet, and in Europe in particular. These frameworks show us the way forward that we must take if we want to respond to the challenges standing in front of us in a conscious and responsible way. The frameworks clearly show that there is nothing wrong with knowledge that we already have. We know the situation we have at hand. We have analyzed, assessed the risks. We have discussed and identified the actions we must take, and we have agreed how we should move forward together. Yet there are several challenges remaining in gathering and applying this knowledge, and these challenges we have to solve, and also in making us all aware of how urgent it is to apply the relevant measures to meet these challenges. One of the main challenges we have at hand is a specific one that this session will address, that of coherent implementation. The reason why coherence is so important is simply because it is a matter of efficiency. If our efforts are not coordinated and aligned, we are wasting valuable time and resources. Unfortunately, all the knowledge we have is not only to our advantage, partly because we have so much information that it is difficult to process it, but also because the knowledge is scattered and fragmented. We need to work more together, across sectors and between countries, to integrate the knowledge we have, so that we can facilitate the implementation process in an efficient manner. Coherence in implementation starts with cohesion in the knowledge behind the actions that are taken. What we need to do is to bridge the cooperation gap between climate change experts and civil protection professionals to enable real prevention and preparedness for current and emerging security risks related to climate change. If we want the work with adaptation to the new conditions to be successful, we need to bring all knowledge on board. There are existing platforms that can function as a bridge between different sectors and countries already today. And the Council of Baltic Sea States, which I represent here, is one of them. At the Secretariat, we are actively facilitating the connection between different networks and experts working with the implementation of the Sendai network, Agenda 2030 and SDGs, as well as the Paris Agreement. The CBS's contribution to this work is to strive for the coherence in the implementation by bringing different stakeholders together. In our region, EU strategy for the Baltic Sea region functions as an enabling framework that makes the implementation of these three different policies coherent. The CBSS Secretariat is coordinating the EUSBSR policy area Secure, which specifically addresses the implementation of the Sendai framework from the civil protection side, and they were coordinating also the horizontal action climate, working on addressing all climate change related changes in compliance with the Paris Agreement. The fact that these two areas are both under umbrella of the strategy makes it easier to work together across sectors and to bring together the different networks in these respective areas. I will attempt to illustrate how bridging the cross-sectoral gap and managing the knowledge in a coherent way. I would like to describe a project we initiated recently. The specific output of the cooperation between policy area Secure and horizontal action climate under the EU strategy is a project Cascade. It's is deciphered as Community Safety Action for Supporting Climate Adaptation and Development. And this project will begin in January 2019. The Cascade initiative entails concrete cooperation between climate change adaptation experts and civil protection professionals, seeking to improve urban resilience in cities and towns, as well as overall macro-regional resilience. The expected outcome of the Cascade project is to adapt existing risk assessment methodology to the climate change context and tailor it to the local level. The strategy behind the Cascade initiative is that two existing networks are already connected to the project initiative, and namely the CBSS Civil Protection Network and the Baltic Sea Region Climate Dialogue Platform. These two networks will both provide valuable input during the project itself, feeding into the work process through policy dialogues. But most of all, they'll be important in bringing the results from projects into the practice in all the member states. Even though projects are effective tools to advance the implementation of the different agendas in a concrete way, they are limited in scope and time. This is why it is important that project initiatives are anchored in institutional structures that can be influenced by the outcomes and carry out the changes in practice, allowing the results from projects to work in a cumulative manner and for them to change practices bit by bit over time. The Cascade initiative, as well as other similar initiatives, is derived from common challenges that were identified and from the regional monitoring of the implementation of the different policy and the regional monitoring of the implementation of different policy frameworks would enable identification of common gaps in specific geographic contexts. Through identifying these regional gaps, it will be easier to initiate cooperation in areas where several countries or municipalities are facing challenges on similar issues. This would also be based on specific conditions the countries have due to their geographical location. The answer to one of the challenges with making the implementation coherent is to make different sectors and countries work more together. It might be true that how we have reached the development level of today has been through means that have been bad for the environment and the climate. Additionally, it has also increased vulnerability of the populations in Europe and around the globe. However, this does not mean that the means we use in the future need to take the same path. Therefore, innovation is key. In this process, innovation in ideas on how we can work to achieve all the goals in an interconnected way. I would like to conclude by emphasizing that three key issues that can greatly facilitate the process of making the implementation of these three important agendas coherent. First, we need to be open-minded, creative, and innovative. Second, we need to bring all the knowledge we have on board and use that knowledge more efficiently. And last but not least, we do not only need to build bridges between sectors, levels, and countries. That is simply not enough. We need to build these bridges together. With these words, I would like to conclude. Thank you for your attention and wish fruitful discussions over the day. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think it's most significant to remember why coherence is important. As you said, it will help us reach our goals faster and more efficiently without wasting valuable time or resources. And your Cascade initiative, bridging the cross-sectoral gap and managing the knowledge in a coherent way, is also a good introduction to our panel debate, which we're now going to move on to now. Please can I ask the speakers to come and join me on stage? And while they're making themselves comfortable, I'll remind you that you can send in your questions via Pigeonhole Live, and they'll be considered during the Q&A. Don't be shy, do come up. And don't forget, you can tweet about what you hear here using the hashtag EFDRR 2018. So I'm being joined by 5 eminent speakers on our panel who reflect some of the many dimensions of our debate. Following the order in the programme, we have Mark Fletcher, who is director at Arup and leads its global water business. Arup is an independent firm of designers, planners, engineers, and technical specialists working across every aspect of today's built environment. It advises governments and city authorities on strategies to adopt in line with Sendai, Paris, and the 2030 Agenda. And Mark was made an honorary fellow of the Society of Environment earlier this year. Next to me here is Vladimir Bekker, who is the chairman of the Committee of Emergency Situations at the Ministry of Internal Affairs in the Republic of Kazakhstan. Before moving into this area, he had long-standing experience in the Kazakhstan State Fire Service. He's been awarded for his service to the firefighting authorities, as well as in emergency prevention and response. Speaking in Russian, he'll be telling us how Kazakhstan is coordinating its approach. To give us a more regional perspective, next to me here we have Maria João Telhado, who has recently been appointed as head of the Environment and Energy Division at the Environment, Energy and Climate Change Department at Lisbon City Hall in Portugal. Before that, she was an advisor in the civil protection area, so she now spans both disaster risk reduction and climate change community, which she will tell us is something of an advantage. We're also joined by Ivan Baras, who is Assistant Head of Sector for Emergency Management in the Ministry of Interior in the Republic of Serbia. He works in the fundamental area of coordinating all the main stakeholders. Sure, not an easy job. He's a member of Serbia's working group implementing the Agenda 2030, and he's the country's national focal point for Sendai. So his expertise also cuts across two areas in question, like Maria. And on the end, we have Cees van der Guchte, who is advisor to the Ministry of Infrastructure and Water Management in the Netherlands. He works at the independent Institute Deltares, the main knowledge provider to the Netherlands government on water-related policy development. Cees's long-standing experience in integrated water management means he is a primary advisor on Sendai to the ministry. Please give our panelists a big warm welcome. So we're not going to have any PowerPoints or any speeches. We're going to really sort of launch into a discussion which starts with a question that I'm going to put to all of our panelists. And I want to hear from their perspective, as a way of introduction on their experience, their understanding of coherence in terms of implementing Sendai, Paris, and the Agenda 2030. And what I would like to do is I'd like to start off with the national perspectives. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to ask Vladimir Bekker to tell us what coherence means in Kazakhstan.
Уважаемая госпожа Aminda Leigh,
Dear Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Ministry of Internal Affairs of the Republic of Kazakhstan, let me welcome the participants of the European Forum for Disaster Risk Reduction and sincerely thank its organizers, the Government of Italy and the United Nations Bureau for Disaster Risk Reduction. The effective implementation of the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction is not possible without adequate consideration of the threats posed by climate change. The provisions of the Sendai framework and the Paris Agreement not only have common goals for protecting people, but also complement each other. Are concrete action plans for achieving sustainable development, strengthening the adaptive capacity of countries, increasing resilience and reducing disaster risk in a changing climate. Sorry, there is no translation. Something's happening. Okay, so it's working now. Climate change is a key point to understand the problems of today. Due to the different terrain of Kazakhstan, we are experiencing a negative impact of climate change, including the increase in disaster risk caused by it. In the mountainous regions of Kazakhstan, the degradation of glaciers already leads to a sharp increase in the threat of destructive mudflows. Guided by the provisions of the Sendai framework and the recommendation of the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development Risk Management, Kazakhstan has revised the system for providing anti-mudflow and anti-landslide protection of human settlements. First of all, the risks were re-evaluated since in the last 3 years alone, the number of glacial lakes increased by 10%. Secondly, starting from 2016, a complex of regulatory support for the creation of risk monitoring system was carried out, including the development of a methodology for organizing and operating automated mudflow hazard monitoring, as well as design estimates for installing autonomous monitoring stations, information receiving and processing center. Installation of systems is planned for 2019-2020 with the allocation of funds by the state in the amount of more than 1.5 million euros. Thirdly, in Kazakhstan, the method of reducing the risk of 16 most dangerous glacial lakes has been successfully introduced by lowering the water level to a safe one, on which controlled water discharge into the beds of mountain rivers is carried out using powerful pumps and siphon devices. The annual volume of discharged water exceeds 9 million cubic meters. The final link in the system of measures aimed at preventing the harmful effects of melting glaciers is the construction of mud dams in the most dangerous areas. On the basis of the conducted research, in addition to the 21 existing ones, next year it is planned to start construction of 3 new dams, each of which will be able to stop the mud flow of 10 million cubic meters. The amount of state investment in the construction is about 80 million euros, 33 billion tend. The situation is similar in the flat territory, where over the past few years, during the spring flood of rivers, there has been a threat of flooding of several dozen settlements in which similar disasters were recorded only in the middle of the last century. Climate change affects temperatures in winter, the level of soil freezing increases the intensity of snow melting and precipitations in spring. As a result, the hydrogeologic characteristics of rivers change. The volume of spring floods has increased dramatically. Since 2015, the number of flood hazard assessments has increased by 24%. In 2017, the roadmap, a set of measures to prevent and eliminate flood threats for 2017-2020, was developed, which provided 637 practical engineering measures for the production of human settlements, transport infrastructures, and the economy. Last year, 204 events worth 30 million euros have already been implemented, which have been spent on building and strengthening 107 protective dams, repairing 71 hydraulic structures, 8 bridges, and 12 highways. In the current year, we budget about 45 million euros for the implementation of measures to prevent flooding of the territories. These measures allowed minimizing threats to 491 settlements of the Republic of Kazakhstan. Despite the fact that Kazakhstan has turned from aid recipient to a donor, our country intends to enter the top 30 most competitive economies in the world, strives to join the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. There are problems which can only be solved through interaction with the international community. So, we are striving to start work on the basis of the Center for Emergency Situation and Disaster Risk Reduction, created in 2016 by the governments of Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan in Almaty, an effective scientific and technical council that will consolidate the activities of scientific organizations dealing with disaster risk reduction, seismic, environmental, and hydrological threats. Kazakhstan is extremely interested in studying the best practices in the use of predictive emergency and rescue services for information obtained online using space technologies. Like other countries, it is necessary to consolidate the efforts of the scientific community in studying the problem of glacier degradation. Once again, I would like to thank the organizer of today's forum for the opportunity to directly exchange experiences between the countries, and let me assure the conference participants that the Republic of Kazakhstan is committed to achieving all the tasks set in the Sendai framework and the Paris Agreement. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, and maybe someone might want to ask the question where all that money comes from. There's an incredible investment there, but we'll get on to that later. Right, sticking with a national perspective, and Ivan Baras, I would like to ask you to tell us how things are in Serbia.
Good day to everyone once again, and thank you, Mr. Aminda, for the opportunity to share the experience and the position of the country of this matter. Following your question on the perspective of the coherent implementation of those relevant agreements, I would like to share with you that it's ongoing process, simulation and coordinating process in the Republic of Serbia in implementation of Agenda 2030, Sendai monitor process, and the Paris Agreement. Furthermore, as I'm coming to the a part of disaster risk reduction of my background as well that my background is civil protection, I would like to share that disaster risk reduction is an integral part of those agreements, and the key elements of disaster risk reduction are the part of Agenda 2030. And however, the key element of the Paris Agreement may have great implication of the DRR. I would like to share that Republic of Serbia and National Parliament recently adopted the new legal framework in the field of the disaster risk reduction. Namely, the law of disaster risk reduction and emergency management was adopted, and it's fully covered the activities on this field. It's fully aligned with the Sendai framework for action and other relevant documents in this field, and takes into account both international regulations and strategic documents as well as EU regulations on this field. Furthermore, the new law will set the new outline in the area of risk prevention and risk reduction. And it will address all significant activities in the implementation of Sendai framework as well as Sendai monitor process, taking into account the existing disaster loss data which Serbia is starting to fulfill at 2020 years. So, National Parliament of the Republic of Serbia also implement and adopted the new law of critical infrastructure and the law of voluntary firefighting, as well as amendment of the law of the fire protection. And those laws will additionally complement the commitment to manage risk not only emergencies and disaster through the comprehensive multi-hazard national risk assessment that we plan to be adopted by the government of the Republic of Serbia in coming months. When we are at point of activities in the field of obligations under the Paris Agreement, I must tell that Serbia has been the part since the August and 2017, right before that adoption of the Paris Agreement. Republic of Serbia has already in 2015 is one of the first country in the region that started to intended national determinate contributions, so-called INDCs, that investigate the reduction of the greenhouse by 9.8% to 2030, given in mind that to be the level of existing 1990. Serbia also, beginning of this year, hosted a high-level Telhado conference with the EU in order to share the experience and the best practices with our and other stakeholders. Also taking into account the losses and the damages caused by the climate changing, as well as obligations under the international regulations, the Republic of Serbia started to draft the law of the climate changes, which will define institutional and strategic framework for the climate change adaptation in the country. Finally, there is commitment of the Republic of Serbia at the implementation of Agenda 2030 and the SDGs. And we'd like to share the information of activities undertaken in this sense. In order to establish the complement and this complex task, Republic of Serbia established the multi-sectoral working group composed by 27 ministries, institutions, agencies, and other relevant actors, and prepared the national report on Serbia on Agenda 2030 that is mapping the Sustainable Development Goals in relation to the national strategic framework and the process of negotiation chapters in European Union. In order to better understand the Agenda 2030 with the support of the EU country team in Serbia, EU delegation in Serbia and the World Bank, Serbia is undergoing the MAPS mission, so-called Mainstreaming Acceleration and Policy Support Mission. A result of conclusions of the MAP mission will provide the basis for the drafting the national voluntary review, which will present next year in the UN high-level political forum. Moreover, this result, which will be able in the beginning of December this year, will also provide us the base of prioritization of the among 17 SDGs. To round my position, I would like to share that the commitment of those relevant agreements as well as ongoing activities in the Republic of Serbia in establish the new legal framework as well, and it will serve the sound base to support the prevention and improving the resilience measures and lead us from emergency and disaster management to the risk management and the risk reduction, and therefore they ensure the sustainable developments for the future. Thank you.
And now I'd like to turn to you, Cees van der Tjerte, to tell us a little bit more about what's happening in the Netherlands.
Okay, thank you. I'm happy to speak here on behalf of the Dutch Ministry of Infrastructure and Water Management. I'm coming from this world, water management, and maybe I might start with telling something about where we from the Netherlands come from. It's a low-lying country. It is not very huge in territory, but 1/3 of its territory is below sea level, and 2/3 of its territory in total is prone to floods, either coming from the sea or from the rivers that carry the water to us, in the delta of the rivers Rhine and Meuse and Scheldt. We come from a long way, having fighted disasters, floods, for centuries actually, and walking from one incident to the others. Many villages have drowned into the sea and many people had to move to higher grounds. But at a certain moment, and also that is centuries ago, the persons that got impacted thought, how can we better prepare for the next flood to come? And we started creating our polder system. And polders you cannot create at your own, you have to do it together with many stakeholders. You have to think of your neighbors, because the water flows, it's about water management also. You have to think of your neighbors upstream and downstream. And I believe, well, we became rather successful in having such a preventive approach to protect against flooding for future disasters that might come. We have built this institutionally, this multi-stakeholder approach, institutionally at a national level, and now it's at the heart of our national policy dealing with sustainable development. It's institutionally embedded, which makes it strong. It's embedded with a coherence and joint working of the different actors, the ministries, the provinces, the water boards, and all together, underpinned with the law, and the budgets needed, they are out of the political debate of every day. We believe that this type of strategy, to have it oriented towards prevention, is very worthwhile. We heard it this morning also, the statement, well, 70% of the impacts of natural disasters is related to water. So water is a bridge between all those agendas, in our opinion, because it's at our national heart. And also, investment in prevention, for €1, you might gain another 6, 7 or 15 even, because of the preventions of losses that may occur. So we're very fond of the possible trends that was supposed to be started to have a new trend actually, to have more ODA money invested in infrastructure that relates to preventive action. Now it's only 13%. Our CEO from UNHCR mentioned this morning, and we should like to see it happening more and more. Now at the national level, the Sendai framework, with its targets and indicators, it has incentives for many of us to report on losses, casualties and damage because of disasters that have happened. In dealing with these preventive approaches, we also would like to see incentives to report on investments being made on preventive interventions. But these type of indicators are not there in the Sendai framework. There is a placeholder though, which is about Target E, developing national disaster risk reduction plans, and we would like to recommend very strongly to have that placeholder being used more strongly to share approaches on preventive interventions and investments as to reduce disasters' impact. There's also a notion that the climate agenda should be better incorporated. When we look into our investments in the Netherlands, we very much make use of climate scenarios, looking up to 80 years beyond present days, up to 2100. And we take those projections into account when designing our infrastructure to protect against flooding. That's to protect our people, our assets, but it's also to show off that our place is an interesting country to invest in, to have our economy running. So then, dealing with uncertainties, we also go for the safe side of those uncertainties. Being prepared and keeping up appearances in this situation where we are below sea level and prone to floods. So we think that the coherence of dealing with both climate adaptation under those scenarios projected for the coming 80 years is very useful to be better connected to the disaster risk reduction strategies that we have in place now. This is also reflected in the SDGs, and the indicators from Sendai, you may find them back in the SDG on cities, 11.5, where the casualties and losses are being addressed. But also in SDG 13, where the climate adaptation plans and the disaster risk reduction plans are supposed to be mentioned in togetherness. And I think very much that we should do our best to have them in a coherent way being developed. Maybe to have a last point on this national approach in the Netherlands, disaster risk reduction and climate adaptation, when it relates to protection against flooding, is not only about prevention, it's also about spatial planning in case disasters occur. We try to reduce the possible impact by smart spatial planning. It's complemented with contingency plans for emergency situations that may occur also. So it's a multi-pronged approach. And this set of approaches, again, is embedded in our national safety profile, which also deals with other threats, disease, epidemics, cybercrime, and all it's being discussed in our cabinets jointly with the different ministries, with those different actors, to set priorities in a coherent way. So coherence among different agendas is at the heart of our system in the Netherlands, and we're very used to the multi-stakeholder approaches and dialogues to jointly make the next steps into this future. Thank you.
Okay, so we've heard a transnational, cross-national point of view, we've heard national points of view, and now we know that obviously it's important to get the regions involved. And so now I want to hear a little bit from Maria João Telhado. Maria, to tell us what's going on in Lisbon in Portugal.
Okay, first of all, I congratulate the organization, the moderator, my colleagues, the audience, and of course the Portuguese team with who I daily work. And it's important to be present here and to represent Lisbon City Council. It's important to remind that my work until this year was focused in civil protection in terms of the emergency cycle in prevention and preparedness. And nowadays I combine that priorities with climate change and also with extreme meteorologic events. I'm a focal point of Making Cities Resilient campaign. My city is getting ready for EFDRR based on Sendai framework, and also in the subcommission of the Portuguese National Platform for Disaster Risk Reduction, with the responsible of the National Authority of Civil Protection. Working these subjects together, I'm in terms of urban resilience assessment, scorecards, multi-risk assessment, early warning systems, disaster risk reduction, emergency planning, information and public awareness, GIS and risk and hazard maps, climate change, mitigation and adaptation strategies. During the last 4 years in Lisbon, the mayor has one new point of view. It's important to have coherence between all the commitments that Lisbon voluntarily signed. They are Sendai framework, signed in 2010, Paris Agreement and the Covenant of Mayors for Climate and Energy, signed in 2008, the new urban agenda, and the Sustainable Development and Agenda 2030. All of these instruments were working separately inside of the municipality based on different working teams and different sectors. Some of them were related with civil protection, others were related with urban planning, others were related with environment and economy and innovation. These were different pieces of a puzzle or ingredients of a master class. So, working together, creating a new group team inside the municipality and including all the stakeholders that are responsible for the resilient city, we create a strategy based in different steps. This ongoing strategy, with some steps already filled on, others ongoing, were these. Step 1, prevent expected disaster risk, climate change, and extreme weather situations. Based on historic events, we have all our reality. Step 2, Lisbon's diagnosis. Today, Lisbon is a complex system with more than 1 million of citizens who live, work, study, circulate, and visit the city. Majority Portuguese, of different ages, cultures, religions, ethnicities, education levels, knowledge, and language. Step 3, involve the political leadership, the mayor, the councillors, the municipality as one structure team, key actors, stakeholders, experts, volunteers. This point is already ongoing. Linked the local strategy with the national level, ongoing. Invest in a joint dynamic strategy. Combine the territorial, the sectorial, and the transversal approach in one unique piece. Step 6. Manage this municipality as a complex, vulnerable, critical infrastructure. We know that we are depending on different multi-interdependencies at different levels with different sectors, but we need to have autonomy to deal and to face disaster risks and climate change. Step 7. Integrate a holistic methodology, focus in the vision of the city of Lisbon, its work to the citizens, to their quality of life in guaranteeing their basic service, the heritage preservation, the environment resilient and the sustainable development to face disaster risk and climate change. Step 8, invest in a communication and in a participatory process with the citizens. Step 9, combine platforms. It's impossible to have a unique platform. Invest in technology, but it's impossible to have all the outputs in one specific platform. We need to integrate different models. Step 10, increase the online monitoring and share this information with all the citizens and all the actors. Final, review and update our process.
Thank you. So there you are. It's all simple, just 10 steps, and then, and 11 doing the reviewing.
Yes.
Yes, like ABC. I'm sure we'll be hearing it's not quite as simple as that.
No.
And our final initial intervention, I'd like to ask Mark Fletcher from Arup, who works with multiple cities around the world, what your view is on coherence.
There we go. It's, for me, coherence is really about a sort of establishing much more of a common understanding, a common language, which is difficult when we use different terminology, and getting much more alignment in terms of a common purpose. 2 weeks ago, I was back in Italy. I was at the Bellagio Centre on Lake Como, and we're developing an innovative framework looking at the water resilience of cities. It brings together thinking on managing disaster risks, climate change, urbanisation, and water resilience, working with the OECD, 100 Resilient Cities, Stockholm International Water Institute, colleagues at Arup, and supported by Rockefeller and Lloyds. So why? Why is it we're hearing this term resilience throughout this conference and the scale of cities? The United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change have stated that the majority of the impacts of climate change will be felt through the water cycle. Sendai covers all risks, including climate change risks. At the World Water Congress in Tokyo about 6 weeks ago, the chair of the IPCC stated the number of water-related natural disasters has increased more than threefold since 1980, and weather's becoming more extreme. We've now passed the point at which more people live in cities than in rural areas. And we're experiencing this increasing rate of urbanisation and the rise of the megacity, which we've heard about during this conference. Indeed, this last session, we were looking at city focus for things like extreme disasters like Vesuvius. We've applied a water lens for this at a basin scale to create a city water resilience framework. And to try and keep this practical and pragmatic, we're piloting this on cities including Cape Town, Miami, Mexico, Amman, and Hull. There are Wave 1 cities. Our Wave 2 cities are Thessaloniki, Rotterdam, and Greater Manchester. We're also recognising the importance of governance across the water cycle and are assessing this with the OECD and Stockholm International Water Institute, supported by the Resilience Shift. And this was highlighted this morning in terms of Paris by the OECD, the importance of increasingly in governance in our understanding as we go forward. Remember the Sendai framework timescales consistent with the 2030 SDGs, and the 2030 SDGs embrace a range of common issues, including resilient systems and cities under SDG 9, resilient infrastructure, Goal 11, sustainable cities and communities, and 13, climate action. And the important thing as we've gone through this is we've recognised the importance of systems thinking. We're no longer in Italy can we think about a city as like a pizza of different flavoured slices. We see that all these systems are far more interdependent, and understanding that those interdependencies are going to ensure we have a much more coherent understanding of resilience for cities.
Thank you. Now, in fact, I've been looking at the pigeonhole questions coming up, and the most popular one is the one I want to ask next, and I was going to ask it anyway, so thank you. The question I'd like to ask the panelists is, what are the bottlenecks for the coherent implementation of the agendas we're talking about? And I'd like to take that question a little bit further and say, how can we get around those bottlenecks? So ideas on how we can meet these challenges. I don't know who would like to answer first of the challenges that you have.
Thank you. I think it's a very, very good question regarding to the bottleneck, regarding to the challenges that we are facing. I'm sure that we can agree that all of us are facing the same challenge. This is in this implementation of those agreements, because those agreements ask for a holistic approach, and they also ask for good coordination and activities of all stakeholders involved of process, both governmental institutions, agencies, as well as such other experts, academia, civil society, marginalized and sensitive groups, private sectors, business community, media, of course. And the full commitment and strong engagement of those ensures that inclusive approach to the partnerships is involved on those activities and allows everyone to be heard. On the end, I think the main challenge is every comprehensive, complex activity is the good coordination and involvement of all relevant stakeholders and important agencies and institutions. However, my personal position and opinion, the Republic of Serbia is done a lot, and I think a lot of countries has done a lot, and in order to ensure that information flow and exchange of the planned activities are ongoing. So I have a positive opinion. Thank you.
Mark?
Yeah, I'd just like to pick up a couple of points there. An important thing is that we've got national commitments for sustainable development goals that we have to, I think, translate into what those mean at a regional, at a city, at a district, and even at a personal level. And I think it's only when we start to unpack that do people understand where we've got common space. I think that's really understand, and it's this thing I was talking about earlier, common purpose, common understanding, recognizing we're actually talking about essentially a lot of the same things. And to do that, we have to come out of our silos and we have to play together a little bit using common language, where risk, shock and stress we're using all in the same sort of forums and not separately.
Maria, do you want to talk about this very important, all this interconnection of local, regional, cities?
The reality are different because we have a small territory and we work together with the citizens, and at national, at regional level. We have different realities. It's difficult to have data, to have the same priorities and political decisions. When we work, Lisbon worked better with the national level because the dimension of civil protection in Portugal, of Lisbon, is similar to the national level. And when we know each person, it's important to work together. So the process of resilience, of working, some of these commitments is possible to do with the national level. But when we want to work, for example, without Sendai, but with the Paris Agreement, we need to work with other ministries. So it's difficult to have the similar results that we have with the national authority.
Anyone else like to add anything from the panel on this case?
Thank you very much. The important wordings have been said. I would like to highlight the word language and capacity building amongst the different communities so that they talk each other's language. For example, this morning in the financing part, it was mentioned by one of the insurance representatives. Resilience is the capacity to bring yourself back to the situation where you were before the disaster happened. And we as an insurance help you to reach that. Talking about resilience in climate adaptation, there's a notion that the situation where you were before the disaster may not be there anymore at all. It might have changed. So how do you cope with that different perceptions of resilience and to have capacities to address it, and also in the assurance way?
Okay, thank you. A question's caught my eye on Pigeonhole here about without citizens' adherence, it's not possible to build and implement policies and how we cope with this critical issue. I think it's interesting because we're already having enough problems talking amongst the communities between themselves, and then we've got to get the citizens on board as well. And these topics are complicated, are also frightening for citizens. Maria, I have to ask you because, of course, you know, on a community,
Yes.
you are very involved in the community level.
Yes, with the participatory process, it's important to have some volunteers and invest in the participatory process. We need to have step by step to involve the citizens and to have them inside of the process. Because normally the citizens that want to be involved, they don't, they want to have power, and in this process we don't give power to the citizens. We work together. It's a different perspective.
And they're involved. And
yes, they need to know how to prevent. They need to know the principal measures for itself, behaviors and measures, and then in a disruption event or a small accident, because we don't have in Lisbon big disasters, thank God, they need to be managed by the municipality.
Mm-hmm. Okay, we've got plenty of questions coming in. I'm going to open the floor to questions as well with microphones. So if anyone in the room would like to... okay, there's a gentleman over there. I'm going to get a microphone to you. I'll call you in a minute. Anyone else in the room? Okay, we'll come to you in a moment. We'll see what other questions we have on Pigeonhole. We have one of our top voted ones. Would it be possible and practical to further develop the existing coherent tool for monitoring the targets, also for all 2030 agendas, including climate change framework and the new urban agenda? In other words, getting everything all together. Would that be possible and practical?
As I said in my presentation, I think it's not possible to have only one existing
further
tool.
develop the existing
platform, a tool. Yeah. It's impossible because each commitment have different goals, different indicators to be measured. And sometimes we need to combine two indicators for one commitment to give answers or outputs to another commitment. This is my opinion.
Anyone else have any? Yep. Mark?
Yes. I see them as sort of, if you look at, imagine a Venn diagram where there's plenty of overlap. And I see that the elements of each of these form strands. And if we weave the strands together, we start to get strength from those strands coming together from each respective place. And if we can combine those in a coherent common purpose, then we'll get this rope. And why do we need a rope? Because the SDGs take us to 2030, but we have to stop ourselves going towards the abyss that is climate change and some of the scenarios, the warming scenarios that we're seeing. And we need that rope of us working collectively together to have the strength to take the action that we need to avert our oblivion.
I would like to highlight the last words of Mark. We need to take the action as we need. It's very nice to have a joint reporting mechanism, but the reporting, I would see, it's an instrument also to get into a dialogue. But the real thing has to happen also without monitoring and reporting. And to my impression, quite some effort is being spent on monitoring and reporting, but it leads away from the real thing to happen. And I would start from there.
Earlier on, we heard about the huge investment that's going on in Kazakhstan for risk reduction with the mud dams and the huge infrastructure projects. where are you getting that money from? It's a huge amount of money, so I'm interested to know where it's coming from and how you're managing to sustain that.
Спасибо.
Today, we understood what is the path we must follow to solve the general problems we discussed. We carried out an analysis of the emergency situations. We considered the damages and the fact that the spending for prevention are less than the spending to recover the damages which already happened after disasters, caused by disasters. So we decided as a government to work to pave a way, a solid way. So what I was talking about today, the budget, they say that we decided to allocate a budget considering risk. We believe it is necessary to understand what are the areas with the main impacts. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so yes, it's important to understand the areas of the main impacts. And also, there was also a question about monitoring as well in what mechanism you're using to monitor progress in Serbia as well. Then could you tell us about that? How are you monitoring your progress on all these fronts?
Thank you for those questions. Regarding to monitoring all of those processes, I already mentioned in my previous elaboration that the coordination between and among the different actors is crucial. Also reporting. For example, on Agenda 2030 and as well as Sendai framework for DRR, for example, they are correlated, namely by reporting to the Sendai monitor process on the DRR activities, country also reporting to the SDGs, for example, SDGs 1, 11, and 13. So it's visible. It's visible to other. Also maybe a little bit further challenge will be Paris Agreement, and because those activities not fully correlated with the DRR and the SDGs. But Republic of Serbia is doing our best regarding to coordination. So this is main activities, and this is, I think, one I want to underline. Coordination between all the actors, not only on the national level, but starting from the local level, local authorities, cities, municipalities, till the national level, as both with the NGOs and the private sector, and of course academia, everybody. Thank you.
Okay, I'd like to go to the gentleman who has the microphone and would like to ask the question.
Yeah, my name is Mike Turner. I'm from representing UNESCO here. The session on cultural heritage was pushed out right to room A, and the question really is that how are we integrating cultural heritage into the format? And I was very pleased to hear that new urban agenda was actually brought on board, but we also have the historic urban landscape recommendation of UNESCO, and we're beginning to reach out to risk evaluation. It is compulsory, mandatory for World Heritage properties. How, in fact, is the risk reduction reaching out to cultural heritage?
Thank you. Do we have any answers on the panel? Cees, we'll start with you.
Thank you for your question. I think it's a good entry point, cultural heritage, which is being addressed in several ways already. It's one of the reporting requirements under the Sendai framework. We have at a European scale, we have had a national year on cultural heritage where also the risk perceptions related to disasters have been addressed. And there are several international networks where you are probably more aware of than me myself, like ICOMOD and others, that try to incorporate risk thinking and system thinking to address risk of cultural heritage. And I would like to add to that that heritage, cultural heritage, it's not only about buildings, like we have a lot of here in Rome. It's also about people's habits, indigenous people, traditional agriculture practices, which relate to landscapes, which are not always listed as formal cultural heritage sites under the UNESCO framework, but are as important to have disaster risk reduction in place and to protect them well from disasters. I hope this answers your question more or less.
Yes, I mentioned that one of the pilot cities we're engaged with on the city water resilience framework was Hull, which has just been Europe's City of Culture. So it's been really important that we've embraced and engaged through the governance across the water cycle, not just the main authorities responsible within that city and across that catchment, but 17 organisations that extend across there, that prior to our work, I think they were working with 5 major organisations. The only way in which we can properly embrace that agenda is by ensuring that we're engaging with all those organisations. And it's a fundamental thing that governance has to go hand in hand with our approach to resilience, disaster risk reduction, or how we might mitigate the impacts of climate change.
Thank you. If no one else on the panel has any, Maria, you want to add something?
As I said before, working together with the National Authority of Civil Protection and also with the sectorial area from the Lisbon City Council, we work together with different museums inside the municipality. What can we give them? The risk maps for them to know which principal risks they will expect to have, and give to them some procedures and make with them some training. These are the principles that we made in Lisbon municipality.
Thank you. Gentleman with a question there.
Thank you, Chair. Anton Mikhailov, I work with the Council of Europa Major Hazards Agreement, and I'd like to touch on the point of resilience. We seem to hear a lot about increasing resilience and less about the need to reduce the need for resilience. And in this sense, maybe we should be looking at resilience very much today's resilience and the future consideration of resilience. And I wonder, maybe our colleague from Holland is maybe they've already started doing that, where they seem to be looking at the future vulnerabilities and aspects of resilience. And I wonder whether the board can consider this. Thanks.
Thank you for your question. I'll also just plug another session that's happening tomorrow afternoon, exactly on the point of addressing resilience in a changing climate, which I will also be chairing. So we'll be going into it in more detail tomorrow, but certainly it's a relevant question today, because if we don't mitigate climate change, we're going to be having to deal with worse problems.
I would be interested to hear the other panelists also to answer on this one. But thank you for your question. I think, yes, we do already move into that direction, but we have a strong notion at the moment that the future projections of climate change for the Netherlands, for possible natural disasters, would need an increase in resilience rather than a reduction. In other countries it might be different though, but yes, we certainly take into account the future, not returning to present-day status after a disaster, but look into the future to be prepared to have disaster and resilient-proof infrastructure being built over that period of time, and to educate and have capacity building with the public also, so that they are prepared for such situations as well.
Ivan, I know that you've got this intergovernmental working group that is looking across all these different areas. Is it looking at resilience? What are you doing about this in Serbia?
I can tell you that before 2014 we are not so much looking at that. We have, fortunately, that year we have the biggest flood in the history of Republic of Serbia. Not only the Serbia, but it was struck by 3 countries, both the Bosnia and Herzegovina and Croatia. So with a huge amount of rain that fell down on the area of Southeast Europe, and starting from that, I think the rising of awareness are going to the higher levels. So we already done that. For example, resilience regarding to the water, regarding to the rivers that are coming through the Serbia, starting to rebuild, to look maybe not 100 years water, but to going to 1,000 years water, because what we saw, that what's happened, that definitely can be happen then. And the set of the measures the Republic of Serbia done in the different ways, starting for the policy, starting for the local government and on the national level, with various institutions on that. Not only related to the water, but related to the forest fires, because the predictions for the Southeast Europe is that they have it much more drought on the summer season, and much more water that it is falling down from the sky regarding to our position. So definitely we must take a look on the future and build the resilience of the country and predictions of the scientists. Thank you.
Maria, Lisbon is European Green Capital in 2020. Are you using that as a springboard to boost resilience and look ahead and also get the citizens involved as well?
With the Green Capital, we intend to increase the investment in green and blue infrastructures. Until now, in resilient process, Lisbon invests only in the red or the building infrastructures. So with that policy to be green capital, we have to have achieved different levels for 12 indicators related with quality life, adaptation and mitigation strategies to climate change, and so on. So with that policy, during the next year, we will invest in climate change and in green and blue infrastructures, or in strategies to adapt and mitigate our territory.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for everyone voting on Pigeonhole. We're now going to wrap up this session. I have 2 quick last questions, and I'd like my panelists to give me their responses. The first one is, we've heard a lot about the need of all the communities to talk to each other and to build their links together. We know that the climate change community is meeting in Poland in next month. And I would like our panelists here to send a message, pass on a message to the climate change community in Poland. What can come out of here and what do we need from them? And I'm going to start with Mark, who can also take this directly because you're going to Poland. So please take lots of notes as all the messages we want to pass on. But what would you like to pass on?
I'd like to rather broaden the dialogue that happens at the COPs to one of, from carbon mitigation to one where adaptation, resilience is very much on the agenda, given the uncertainty of the direction in which we're going. And I think that that would be prudent and sound advice if we all took a slightly broader perspective, given that at the moment our current monitoring on our ability to cut emissions is leading us to an uncertain future.
Vladimir, what message would you like to send to the climate change community from your experience?
You would like to elaborate a system that enables us to receive long-term forecast. I was extremely interested in what our colleague from Netherlands said. He said that long-term provisions, long-term forecast as fundamental, it is a really interesting topic. We must develop that in the future. We would like these topics to be discussed more, to have a more complete and precise scenario.
Yeah?
Share good practice, but also the barriers you need to step up, acting present without compromising future generations.
Okay, thank you. Ivan?
Thank you. I think that a lot of things are being implementation, and a lot of things are done there so far. But definitely commitment for the future. Definitely commitment of those people, and better maybe coordination with other relevant stakeholders regarding to the future activities. Thank you.
Cees?
Yeah, thank you. I believe from this viewpoint of working in the water arena, that water can be a very good linking pin between the disaster risk community and the climate adaptation community. I may also mention that, well, I'm going to Katowice, and in a session there will be the same discussion on coherence between Paris, Sendai and the SDGs, but starting from the climate community then. And in that respect, I would like to bring from here that from the disaster risk community, there's a wealth of information and also tools and instruments which are ready for use within the climate community to address extreme events, extreme climate scenarios, where they, at the moment, in some arenas only talk about, and we are steps ahead. So we can mutually learn and gain from each other's insight.
Thank you.
And maybe one thing to mention more. Within Europe, we are very happy with the regional approaches set by the European Commission, for example, which is in the water arena the Flood Directive and the incentives on climate adaptation and addressing Sendai. I think it should be mentioned in this European setting that they do a lot of good work to bring us closer together. And there are a number of platforms within this European knowledge community that try to share the new insights. Placar is an initiative which very well, I think, tries to combine disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation approaches and includes many much outreach to many different sectors also, including private sector and financing. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm afraid the gentleman with the microphone, we really don't have time for your question, but please come and ask the panelists after the discussions. I would like to just conclude asking a show of hands of the people in the audience here. From what we've heard this afternoon, do you think we have the tools, the know-how and the will to implement Sendai, Paris and the Sustainable Development Goals in a coherent way? So those of you who think, yes, we do, hands up, please. Okay, not many people. No, we don't. Many more people. And those who don't know? Okay, a few, not sure. Well, we obviously have more work to do, but I think it's good that we're going to be taking messages to the climate change community. I think we've heard some really interesting examples today of practical things that people are doing and ways that that can be developed, and hopefully you can take those back to your workplaces. So, after this intense session, I'm sure you're all gasping for a coffee, and you're now going to have a break for 30 minutes. Then, after you're feeling a bit refreshed, running in parallel from 4:30, there will be 3 working sessions. They go on till 6 o'clock. They'll be followed by the Damir Chemerin Awards and Making Cities Resilient campaign signing ceremony. And the day will conclude with a reception hosted by Italy in the foyer. But before you all rush off, Cees?
I have one side remark.
A side remark?
If I may.
Of course.
I'm so much impressed by my neighbor person here next to me, who actually did most of the work today. Okay.
Thank you. You slightly stole my thunder, but I'll allow you to do that. That's okay, because I wanted to do some final thank yous. First of all, to all our panelists and to our keynote speaker for sharing their expert knowledge and valuable experiences. To the interpreters there and also on stage, the technicians and the staff from the United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction who monitored Pigeonhole Live, and they all enabled us to communicate very effectively and clearly, which is most important. And thanks to the session's organisers, led by the Federal Office of Civil Protection and Disaster Assistance in Germany and the Ministry of Infrastructure and Water Management in the Netherlands, along with many others, and of course in conjunction with the UNISDR. Last but not least, I would like to thank all you participants here in the room and those of you watching online for your concentrated listening and your active involvement in the discussions. Please give yourselves a big round of applause.